I love this design. It looks, for the audio listeners, it's like this mid-century 50s, 60s, that...
Like a sunburst.
Yeah, sunburst, perfect. Like on a clock that you would see with all those pointy, yeah. I just, which makes total sense because, and actually Michael Cho, who we were just talking about, the guy who did my 10-second commission at Boston Fan Expo 2 weeks ago, like a fucking wizard magician. Yeah, I don't have time for a commission, so blah, 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 and just took out a piece of cardboard and did this profile of Beyond. It was incredible. Check out at Batman Beyond podcast on Instagram to see it. But we were saying that he is a Silver Age, very much Silver Age style artist, and how much we both love his stuff. And Darwin Cook, who he would live 4 blocks from, and he was telling me this whole story about Darwin Cook, which I'll talk about on this episode. I don't want to get into it, duplicate content. But point is that Darwin was very Silver Age inspired. So is he. So it's cool that if there was that much Silver Age influence on Beyond, which is also slightly ironic. I love it because if you have a retro take, you wouldn't think it would also be the same people who would do a future take.
Right.
But that retro future, again, mid-century kind of, and retro future also just happens to be one of the things that I loved pre my renaissance getting back into Batman Beyond. So now getting back into Batman Beyond and having this already built-in interest to retro future, it's, I love Beyond so fucking much.
Even Bruce Timm himself has a very deep affinity for the Silver Age. To go as far as to reference and
Silver Age, again, 50s, 60s DC Comics.
Mm-hmm. Bruce Timm even makes open references to like Silver Age, Fantastic Four, and Spider-Man, and a lot of these like Ditko, Stan Lee, Jack Kirby-esque era of comics in his series. Like, for example, probably one of the most well-known references is in the Batman Beyond episode Heroes. There is a scene where like the army is attacking the Terrific Trio, and a bunch of debris falls on Terry, and he has to push it off of him, making a direct homage to a similar scenario Spider-Man himself found himself in Amazing Spider-Man issue 33.
Whoa, okay.
It's almost like a one-for-one side-by-side comparison of him lifting this debris off him.
Did you post something about that?
I did.
A lot of because I remember. I think when you say side by side, I think I saw something like that.
Yeah, and it's. The Terrific Trio themselves is an homage to, Silver Age, Fantastic Four kind of
That
thing.
is a shameless homage.
Batman Beyond in a lot of ways is kind of a byproduct, in a lot of ways, a lot of weird ways of the Silver Age, and is really kind of indicative of the Silver Age. And I feel like, Batman Beyond himself as a character borrows heavily from, Spider-Man and other characters, almost of that fantasy-esque that the Silver Age had. Silver Age was a time of, it was less grounded, more just kind of abstract.
A lot of sci-fi, a lot of space.
Yeah, just kind of, I don't want to say generic, but it was very, very fantasy. And I think Batman Beyond really brings that same kind of fantasy, but just in a very technological way.
Right, because 50s and 60s Batman, there was a lot of 50s in particular. He was in space a lot, like a lot of the crazy.
Yeah,
and then 60s, of course, you have Adam West, but this is kind of leading up to Adam West 60s.
The campiness.
The campiness. But it does make sense, though, that would coincide with that, again, mid-century retro future. All of that is based philosophically in positivity. Post-World War II, let's forget that everyone just almost died forever, especially post-nuclear World War II. And we, that was a big deal back then. Like now we're like, oh, nukes. I mean, nukes were, people had no idea what those things were going to do.
Right.
They went off. We didn't know if we were all going to be extinct or not. So there's a lot of positivity post World War II with art, so that makes sense that he would be in space and then we would then go to the moon at the late end of the 60s.
What I find interesting too, like especially when you talk about nuclear and stuff like that, is comic books, in a lot of ways, unlike a lot of other mediums, are not only distractions and kind of escapism fantasy, but in a lot of ways are also direct commentators on the subject matter itself. Spider-Man, for example, as I just mentioned, is not only an escapist fantasy from that, but it's also in commentary of it in a very fictitious and scientific way. He's a byproduct of radioactive experimentation. You know, it's
the bad side of science.
Hulk.
Science gone too far.
Hulk, you know, is a byproduct of radiation.
Oh, very,
you know?
yeah,
So
good call.
These Silver Age characters, as much as they are escapist fantasy of their time, they're also a byproduct and a like open commentary on the time as well. You know, a lot of these characters being byproducts of radiation.
Makes sense. I mean, that's because we also didn't know, speaking of, if this was the first time that nukes had gone off, which it was, that was the first time we had seen nuclear fallout consequences, which take 10, 20 years.
Right.
So fast forward from post nukes going off into the mid 60s, if the nukes went off 45, right, in Japan, that was the end of the war, 45. Fast forward 20 years, you're mid 60s, height of the Silver Age, so it would make sense that a lot of that sci-fi and comics would be like, shit, this is what happens, because then we started to see in Japan the amount, like the radiation and all the stuff going on in the Pacific, what happened to people radiation-wise, yeah. And what even people have, that changed to the point where that information, when they started to see that stuff scientifically, then changed the ethical debate / historical debate on whether or not we should have even dropped those nukes. That's how important nuclear, like, radiation was that big of a deal for so long. And again, we don't think about that stuff now because it's been a while since nukes went off. But nuclear fucking fallout is serious, and that did change the debate, because meaning, like, once they got that information, they were like, if we knew that for 20 years Japan would turn into like that bad, we never would have, or at least it would have been considered more. So the point is that, radiation makes sense that would be a theme.
But to even open that up even wider, that's kind of indicative of why I like Batman Beyond, because Batman Beyond covers in a lot of ways the subsequent effects of a lot of the advances that the world makes, you know, not just radiation, but just kind of technology as a whole and what that means for people. You know, you get, for example, so you get like experimentations, you know, you get people that can create, for example, like in the episode Untouchables, you get a guy who can have a suit that makes it so literally nothing can get through him and nothing can hurt him. What would someone do with that? And we explore that. We get, you know, we get some of the dangerous sides of not just radiation, but, you know, how the science of the medical community can hurt. For example, like in Blight, you know, Derek Powers is a byproduct of Derek Powers is a byproduct of not only radiation, but, you know, that was a medical intervention to respond to this nerve gas that he created. And, you know, he has become a byproduct, a toxin, a blight on society, literally through this. You know, there's a lot of open commentary towards how technology can harm just as much as it can do good. You know, and what technology...
So one of the themes of the show is, without a doubt, technology.
Right, and like what technology does in different hands, you know, what it does in the hands of someone like Derek or Paxton Powers versus what it does in the hands of someone like Bruce Wayne, who, you know, uses it just as a tool or a series of tools to help him on this mission that he had long before this technology became prevalent.
This exact thing came up on Batyard's Finest, our other podcast.
Really?
But it was about, we covered, so every episode of that, we cover... This is our other podcast with, it's a team up of myself from Above and Batman Beyond, and you're welcome anytime. You are a part of the show, of course. But with Batyard Productions from Poughkeepsie, New York, that area. So Josh from Batyard is more Superman focused, so hence Batyard's Finest. It's the team up of Batman, Superman. So we do what I call BS pop culture pieces, in which we analyze every episode we do different stuff again, like DC news and general stuff. We have BS about BS, so anything that comes into our brain, and I shamelessly use BS because I'm a 12-year-old. I'm like, ooh, bullshit's now on my show. It's a character. So BS should just be a character now. But like, yeah, we BS about BS. We do DC news, but one of the things we always do is a pop culture piece. So a BS pop culture piece. So one of them, for example, anything that is a team up of Batman and Superman. So, for example, World's Finest, which is what brought me to what I'm saying now, which was the animated crossover of the new Batman Adventures Batman and Superman the Animated Series back in, I believe it was 98, whenever that was. So, but one of the things that Josh brought up was that it was really interesting in that story to see in the beginning, you could tell it was really very pre-Justice League and this is the first time these guys, not only Batman and Superman met, but people like Lex Luthor and Bruce Wayne were still working together at this point on a corporate level on some weapons project. And then Wayne, of course, pulls out because he's like, you've gone too far. But Josh's point, I saw, when I analyzed it in a way that I found interesting, but one of the things that Josh pulled out of it that I thought was interesting was like, you're seeing two guys with the same exact kind of resources, just applying them totally differently, and their applications is what makes them who they are, villain or bad or good guy. And it's so cool.
Reference to Lex and Bruce.
Lex versus Bruce.
Yeah.
So Lex takes those billions of dollars and makes weapons and bad shit, whereas Bruce does good.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, that's a good point. And
people are always, it's an obvious, like, Lex Luthor is fucking Blight Powers. I mean, it's so similar.
There's a dichotomy. In fact,